The Anbernic RG28XX definitely surprised me. Now, this is kind of like this weird in-between point between a micro handheld, something like the RG Nano, and a horizontal handheld like the RG35XX. Now, there is a lot to like about this handheld because my first impression was, wow, this is light, this doesn't weigh a lot, and two, this is very small. It's easily pocketable, so you can take this with you wherever it is that you're going. Now, on top of that, there's a lot of power packed into this form factor, and that is really something that truly surprised me about this handheld. I didn't think that it would punch so far outside of its weight class. I thought that it was just going to be able to play retro games and that was it, but I could play N64 games, Dreamcast, even some PSP games without having too many issues or running into too many hiccups. That being said, there are some things that I don't like about it, but I'll get into that later on in the video. Now, if you want to pick up one of these handhelds for yourself, Anbernic at the time of this recording is having a sale on their website where you can get it for $40, which I think honestly is definitely worth it if you're considering getting it for yourself. Obviously, if you don't want to get it from Anbernic, you can also purchase it from other sites as well, including Amazon, Keep Retro, and AliExpress through their official store. Now, if you were to go through Anbernic's official store on AliExpress, you can get it for $50. If you were going to get it from Keep Retro, it's $56 and free shipping if I'm not mistaken. And then there is also the Amazon option. Now, the Amazon option, the beautiful thing about that is that if you have Prime, you don't have to worry about any sort of return policy or anything like that. You can just buy it and boom, you're done. But you are going to have to pay a little tiny bit more than you would in other places because of that reseller, buying it and reselling it on Amazon. But again, this is up to you depending on where it is that you want to go ahead and get it. In terms of colors, you do have black, gray, beige, and what I got, which was this orange that's here. And I personally, I like the orange. I like to kind of like stand out a little bit. If there was a yellow option, I would have probably gone with that, but it really just depends on what it is that you want to go for. When it comes to specs, there are a lot of things that are very similar to some of the other handhelds that we've talked about on this channel. For the CPU, you have the Allwinner H700. The GPU is the Mali G31MP2. You have 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM, and the display is 2.83 inches. That's where the namesake comes from, and it is 640 by 480. It's an IPS LCD screen, but I do have to let you know that this is rotated, which causes some problems with the display and some issues, and I'll get into that later on in the video. In terms of battery, it's 3100 milliamp hours, and the weight is 124 grams. In terms of connectivity, you have a mini HDMI, a 3.5mm jack, but there is no Wi-Fi or Bluetooth connectivity. In terms of the OS, this is running on Linux, and the speaker is a mono speaker. You have 2 microSD cards on the bottom, and there is rumble functionality with this handheld. Let's do a quick little tour of this handheld. On the top side, you're going to find the shoulder buttons as well as a USB-C charger. There's 2 light indicators. One is for charging, and then one is for it being powered on. Then you have your menu button and a mini HDMI out. On the bottom, you're going to see the 2 micro SD card slots as well as a 3.5mm jack. On the left-hand side, you are going to see the volume rocker, and on the right-hand side, you're going to find the power button as well as the restart button. And on the front side, you're going to find this beautiful and amazing D-pad that's here, as well as the select and start button and your face buttons with a mono speaker on the side. Ergonomically, this handheld is very similar to the Game Boy Micro, but one of the things that left me kind of scratching my head is the positioning and design of the shoulder buttons. The L2, R2, L1, R1 buttons are kind of all at the top, but it just, I don't know, it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of like that design and why they decided to put it there. In terms of everything else, the D-pad feels phenomenal. This is one of the best D-pads that I've ever played on. It feels very natural. There's enough pivot there to kind of just make you realize that you're going in one direction versus the other. The face buttons are a little tiny bit smaller than I would like. Personally, I like the face buttons on the MinUI A30, and I'll talk about that in another video. But in terms of everything else, they feel really, really good. Now, I don't like the way that the power button and the restart or reset button and the volume rocker is located on the side. It just feels awkward to go ahead and push down that volume rocker in the middle of you playing a game. The same goes with the power button, but obviously with the power button, you need it to turn on or put to sleep or turn off the handheld. So that I kind of understand, but everything else, it just feels kind of weird. I do often question when they put the menu button all the way at the top, where you kind of have to like reach over in order to actually push that button. I would rather have preferred that to be somewhere on the face of the actual handheld. It would have just been much more comfortable to go ahead and have that pushed down with your thumb. But again, this is just personal gripes on my front. Everything else feels relatively good. Now, one of the concerns that I did have with the power buttons and the volume buttons being on the side was that I would accidentally press these buttons whenever I'm gaming on this handheld. Thankfully, that is not the case. Everything just stays where it is, and it doesn't actually really press in unless you put in a good amount of force. So you don't really have to worry about your game accidentally falling asleep or shutting off or your volume going all over the place because of you gaming on this handheld. It just feels nice to go ahead and have. Battery life is really dependent on the games that you're going to be playing on this handheld. Most of the time I ran into around 4-ish hours of battery life, but I play mainly 16-bit titles. Sometimes I'll play a couple of 32-bit titles, but for the most part, if I'm going to be playing N64 or PS1 games, it's going to be, you know, for a couple of individual titles, not something that I'm going to be playing on consistently. I primarily play 16-bit titles, so that 4-ish range is something that I realistically saw for myself. It might be more, might be less, again, depending on the games that you're going to be playing on this handheld. While I was recording content for this video, I took the Anbernic RG28XX outside to just get footage, and I noticed that the screen is actually very dim. Now, obviously, in a dark environment, kind of like how this one is, it would be just fine. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. But if you were to take it outside, you might run into a couple of issues if it's direct sunlight. Maybe in a shaded environment, you might be fine, but the screen was just very, very dim, especially with what I wanted to do on camera. So imagine doing something in person, and it's just, I don't know, it just leaves a lot to be desired in terms of that dynamic range, in terms of brightness that the screen can have. It can be very dark, but in terms of brightness, it's just not there. When I first got my hands on this handheld, like I said, it was just so small that I found it very easy to pocket and take with me wherever. And this is great because I feel like the handheld that you play the most is the one that you always have with you. So if you're going to have something that is always going to be with you, chances are you're going to game more on it. You're going to play more games on this handheld. So it only makes sense to have something that is relatively small, easily pocketable, and to have with you all the time. In terms of weight, it's practically non-existent, at least for me. At 120-ish grams, like it's so easy to pocket and so easy to take with you that you kind of just take it and you kind of forget it until you actually want to go ahead and play some games on it. Now, when you're dealing with the stock OS that comes with the Anbernic RG28XX, this is essentially what you're going to be looking at. And a lot of the RG35XXH, the SP, a lot of them are looking like this. So this is something that's very familiar if you've gotten any of them. But essentially, you have your game room, your RA games, you have your favorites, as well as your history, search, and app center, and the settings. Now, for the most part, if you're going to be playing any games, you're going to be looking at the RA games that are here. And if you wanted to play any specific games, you can go ahead and do so. All you have to do is pick the right platform. From there, if you wanted to go ahead and play specific games, you can. Now, me personally, I am a fan of Sonic Advance. So if I were to go ahead and boot it up, it takes a few seconds for it to boot up. But as you can see, similar to any other rotated screens that are out there, you're going to have a couple of issues that pop up. The FPS counter is on the bottom right-hand corner. And if you're a hardcore fan when it comes to Game Boy Advance, you can tell that this isn't actually the right resolution for it. Now, in order to change that, you have to go back from the quick menu. You go back and you go into the settings. From here, you go into video. And if you go all the way down to scaling, you'll have this aspect ratio that's here. Now, it's 3:4, but again, this is a rotated screen. So if you go to 3:2, it looks like this. It looks totally weird. Now, in order to actually have the proper resolution to this, you have to go to custom, and then from here you can adjust the different things. So you have your width and you have your height. Now the width, you can go ahead and change that all the way down to 320 or 437, excuse me, or 427. And then from there, if you take this parameter right over here and you go all the way to 30, it'll look kind of more or less as it should. And this is actually the proper resolution when it comes to playing Game Boy Advance. Now, this is some of that quirkiness that comes with using a rotated screen, but at the end of the day, you know, if you want to have that true to life experience, kind of like the original, then this is what you're going to have to be dealing with. The same thing can be found for PSP, for instance. Now, when it comes to PSP, obviously, the games were stretched out a little tiny bit more than the Game Boy Advance. But let's say, I wanted to play some Monster Hunter, for instance. It would go ahead and load it up. And again, similar to the Game Boy Advance, the resolution is definitely not as it should. Now, in order to change that, we're going to go all the way back from the quick menu to the settings, and then from there to video, not audio, and then go into scaling. From here, we're going to go into aspect ratio, and we're going to go all the way down to the bottom and go to custom. From here, you can change the x-axis or the x position to 55. And we're going to go all the way over there. And then from here, this is supposed to be 363. And trust me, this is going to look good once it's done. It's going to look almost just like the original. And then 640 is as it should. Now, I know that this looks a little bit weird with the black bars on the top and the bottom, but this is pretty much how it was on the original hardware as far as like aspect ratio is concerned. So again, this is keeping things intact and keeping things as it was with the original hardware. If this is something that doesn't matter to you and you don't really think too much about it, then you don't really have to worry about it. You can just go ahead and game on with that stretched out screen that was there. But once you go ahead and see how things are, it looks much better, since this is the actual resolution and aspect ratio that the original hardware was supposed to be at. The rest of the OS that's here is pretty straightforward, but if in favorites, for instance, if I wanted to favorite something, I would go into let's say PSP and Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. All I would have to do is press start, and then a little star would pop up, and then when I went back to favorites, boom, there it would be right there. It's a nice way to shift through all of the games that are here, because there's going to be a lot of games that you will probably have no interest in, to kind of like, get them to the top and be able to play the games that you want. History will go ahead and show the games that you've been playing on here. If you wanted to search for a specific game, like, I don't know, whatever, it'll go ahead and pop up right over here. And then from there, the app center is pretty straightforward. Now, I personally don't like to see this as a use case scenario for listening to music or watching movies or whatever. It's I don't know. I think it's a nice to have option, but I don't see myself personally using that. I would have my cell phone for that in most cases. If I'm traveling out and about, I wouldn't pull out a retro handheld to watch films or anything like that, but it is nice to have. I do like the fact that there is a file manager here to kind of let you do specific things if you needed to go ahead and do them, which is a nice to have. The settings are pretty straightforward. One of the first things that I did was actually turn off the sound, because there were buttons that, or anytime that I pressed a button, it would make a sound, and it was just annoying for me personally. But aside from that, it's pretty straightforward. There are a couple of shortcuts that are here that if you wanted to, increase the brightness of the screen, you can do so by hitting the menu button and pushing up and down on the volume rocker. But from there, it's pretty straightforward. I don't really think that it's the best use case scenario for most people, simply because of the fact that there's that aspect ratio problem, the resolution scaling, things like that, that just kind of make it a little bit more tedious. There's just a couple of extra things that the average user might not want to handle, but if you're okay dealing with those problems, then this is definitely a good option for you. Now, there are some custom firmwares that are out there already for this handheld that run really well. One of my favorite ones as of late is MinUI, which I'll go ahead and show you everything and how it works on here. Now, one of the things that I do like about this firmware is that all you have to do is install it on the SD card that's here, the first card as well as the second card. There's files that you need. I have a link down in the description to the GitHub page for the files for this. But once you have that set up, it's pretty much set and ready to go. It'll go ahead and install and it'll get things going. I do want to go ahead and mention, though, that this card that's right here is from Toshiba. It's a subsidiary of Toshiba. It's called Kioxia. And I was kind of surprised that this actually came with the RG28XX, because that's from a reputable brand. Obviously, of course, the second card that does not house the firmware is just a regular generic one, but it is nice to see that Anbernic is putting in more reputable cards for the OS. Now, I did have a secondary card. Now, this is from Kingston, and it's 120 gigabytes. You do not need to buy this. This is huge. Honestly, you'd be okay with a 32 gigabyte card, maybe 64 if you want to go ahead and push it. But once you go ahead and have this all set up and ready to go, it's pretty straightforward, and everything will boot over the OS. I absolutely personally love it. I think it's awesome. And MinUI has quickly become one of my favorite custom firmwares out there. Honestly, the ease of use and just kind of things working is probably one of my favorite factors when it comes to this. Now, obviously, there is a recently played list. I did play a couple of games to kind of, see and get the feel for it, but everything is pretty straightforward. All right, now that I have my focus fixed, everything is pretty straightforward. I do love the fact that everything's kind of just listed here in a very minimalistic format. So if you have all these games here, then you can go ahead and play however you see fit. But if I wanted to play Dig Dug, it would go ahead and load it up. Now, the cool thing is that if you push this menu button, there are several options that are here. Obviously, you can continue playing. You can have a save state if you want to. You can load a specific save state. And then there's options. And here's the cool thing that I actually liked about this UI. So obviously, the front end, there's several options that are here, but if you wanted to go to emulator, then there's more options. And if you go into controls, you can customize the controls depending on your hardware that's here, which is super freaking cool. I was actually kind of amazed by it. And you can even customize the shortcuts. So let's say, I wanted to create a new save state. I hit A, which would go ahead and start recording the process to it. So if I wanted to hit menu and that, it would go ahead and just go ahead and save it. So let's say I wanted to go ahead and change it. Menu and that. You don't even need to hit menu. You can just go ahead and hit, there you go, boom. It's absolutely awesome that you can customize everything and save it accordingly. Now, when you're done, you can go ahead and hit save changes and it'll go ahead and save it. You have several options that are here. You can save it for the console, you can save it for the game, or you can just restore the default. So if I save it for the console, boom, save for the console, and I am done. There's just so many cool, quirky little options that are here. So let's try it out. If I hit menu and R2, will it save? Well, we'll see. Boom, there's the save state. It just went ahead and saved it. There are so many cool little nifty little features that I like about this that it really surprised me at how well everything works. And because of its minimalistic design and how lightweight it is, everything just works as it should. Now, I do want to go ahead and mention that I did test out the Game Boy Advance games that are here, and it's hard to tell on this screen, but as you can tell, there's a bar over here and a bar over here, which means that this is actually rendering in the proper resolution and the proper scaling. So this is honestly awesome. Now, obviously, if I wanted to go ahead and bring down the brightness, you can still use that same shortcut that's there with the menu and the power and up, or excuse me, the volume up and down. Everything just works as it should. So it's super awesome. I am honestly very pleasantly surprised at how well this runs on this handheld. Overall, this is honestly something that I would recommend, especially with its ease of use and just being able to play all the games that you want to on this handheld with this custom firmware. Now, when it comes to MinUI, I have to let you know about a couple of things. First and foremost, when it comes down to the software or the firmware itself, there's going to be limitations in terms of the platforms that you can actually play on this handheld. Anything past PlayStation 1 isn't going to run on there. We're talking N64, Dreamcast, as well as PSP. It's not going to run on the custom firmware because the lead developer just isn't going to put those emulators onto the custom firmware. Now, when it comes to the stock OS, you'll be able to play N64, PSP, Dreamcast without any issues at all. Even with some of those 3D titles that are going to be requiring an analog stick to, move around, you can still map that to the D-pad. For example, in Super Mario 64, I was able to, run around, do whatever it is that I want, and I didn't run into any problems at all. But more complex titles like The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, or Majora's Mask, you're going to run into problems because there's no real place to map the C buttons. So I know that there are going to be some instances where people will be able to figure that out for themselves, but for me, I don't want to deal with all of that. I kind of want things to work as best as they can out of the box. So for me, I just wouldn't recommend N64 on this handheld. Now, there are some instances where things will work just fine. For example, Mario Kart 64 works as it should. Same thing goes for Super Mario 64. Things just play fine, but more complex titles are just a little bit more difficult to run on. Same thing goes for Dreamcast titles. I just don't want to deal with the hassle of getting everything set up. But if you want to go ahead and tinker, then by all means do so. PSP, most of the time, things just work straight out of the box. You don't have to worry too much about stuff. And if you're okay with the frame rate dipping from time to time, kind of like in Ridge Racer or Tekken 5, then you can do so without any issues at all. But I don't know. It really just depends on the games that you want to go ahead and experience. If you want everything from PlayStation 1 all the way up to the Nintendo, or all the way back to the Nintendo, then MinUI might be a really good option, especially with this handheld. I personally loved being able to play Game Boy Advance titles, Game Boy games, Game Boy Color, even some PlayStation 1 and SNES titles. Just everything just was great on there. Everything just works, which is awesome. But if I wanted to go ahead and play N64 or PSP games or Dreamcast games, I would revert back to the stock OS. So the options are there. I would just recommend having 2 different SD cards, one with the stock firmware and one with the custom firmware if you want to go that route. It really just depends on what you want to go ahead and play in your own personal experience. So who is the Anbernic RG28XX for? Well, it really depends on the games that you want to go ahead and play. Obviously, for $40, the amount of power that is packed into this tiny handheld and into this tiny form factor is surprising. Honestly, I'm blown away with everything that this thing can do, and it being so small. Like, you can just pocket this and take it anywhere and just play the games that you want to go ahead and play. That being said, there are some hindrances when you go past that 32-bit stage. Dreamcast, N64, them being 32-bit consoles with analog sticks kind of throws a wrench into the compatibility of this handheld. Yes, you can map analog sticks onto the D-pad, but still, it kind of, leaves a lot to be desired when you're actually playing the games. PSP is fine. You don't have to worry about that because it's essentially a D-pad based console or handheld. Now, I will go ahead and say that if you're okay with 8-bit, 16-bit, and PlayStation 1 out of the 32-bit collection of things, then MinUI might be the best way to go when it comes to this. I like the fact that the stock firmware automatically knows what to do with the screen, automatically knows what to do with the resolution, and things just kind of just work out of the box, which is awesome. Now, if you don't want to deal with any of that stuff, the stock firmware is still fine. You're just gonna have to run into, a stretched out PSP screen or a stretched out Game Boy Advance screen. If you're okay with that, then stick with that. Honestly, this is a really nice handheld, and being able to take this on the go with its size and everything is honestly awesome. So what do you guys think of the RG28XX from Anbernic? Is this something that you're going to be picking up for yourself, or is this something that you're just like, whatever, it's cool to see, but I'm not really interested in it? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on things. And if you want to hear my thoughts on the RG35XXH, then click this video over here. And if you want to hear my thoughts on the RG35XX Plus, then click this video over here. And until next time, guys, I will see you on the next one. Peace.